Okay, it is just now almost 11 o'clock, so let's go ahead and potentially get started here. All right. Good morning, everybody. Get a couple things prepped and ready to go here. I've got the 7800, as you can see, in front of me. Well, I know you can't see all of it, but it's there. And I got to clean out my desoldering irons collection tube, which has a lot of stuff in it. That's the bulk of it, I think. All right, should be most of it. Now what I'll do is I'll take an old Q-tip that I've used for cleaning other stuff, saturate it with a little bit of alcohol, and lightly clean up inside the tube a little bit. Okay. That's a nasty looking Q-tip. I know, maybe I should have been more prepared. Well, it's fine. All right. I can at least see most of the tube now, so that will work. All right. 7800. It's in pretty good shape. It still has the protective plastic strip I see on the top of it, although there are some nicks and cuts into this that have probably penetrated through it, but I will not be peeling that off. And in fact, this will make cleaning this case a little more of a challenge because I don't want any water or soap to get underneath this plastic because it'll then discolor and it just looks generally gross. Let's see, I'm going to need to test this because I just unpacked it. So I'm actually going to be using one of my 7800 to Genesis cable harnesses. I made these, I don't know, a couple of years ago. Made about 15 or so of them at the time. Sold them to various people, and like the name would imply, it allows me to use a Genesis power supply on the 7800. And I'm going to have to disconnect my mic so I can go get that power supply. One moment. Okay, I'm reconnected back up. And I need to get this cord out of the way a little bit. Okay, there we go. Now I can power up this 7800 using a Genesis power supply. And I will need to test it. In there, and then I need my test cartridge, which for those that may not realize, I use an old Mateus multi-video game cartridge, 16-in-1, but technically I have it in the 144 case-sized selection right now, so I can only have 8 programs on here. But I mainly only use this for diagnostics use anyway. I don't really actively play games from it that much anymore, other than just, again, diagnostics and burn-in testing. So for those purposes, it's fine. And I apologize, it looks like my heater has kicked in, so it's creating a lot of noise there. Let me see if I can adjust that. We'll see if that's any better. Okay. I think that'll work pretty good. And I need to get a controller plugged in. And now I can power on the 7800. Nothing yet. Could be the Mateus cart. A different position. Sometimes this rotary knob on this thing is kind of goofy. Nope. Not getting much of anything. I wonder if the cartridge slot is pretty nasty inside. What I'm getting is just stripes on the screen after the BIOS loader. So I need to find out what's going on with that. First thing I'll do is clean the contacts on my Mateus cartridge. Because they're exposed and because it gets used in a lot of consoles, it does actually get much dirtier than most of my other cartridges do, which makes sense. Well, it's not too bad this time, though. Maybe there's some issues, underlying issues with the 7800 I'm going to have to isolate first. That's not cool. Yeah, that actually came out looking okay. Okay, that time the test came up, so I will assume that, yes, it was the cartridge, or probably the cartridge port's dirty on this and I'll need to clean it out. And those marks on the shell itself right here? I don't see them. Oh yeah, I guess they are there in person. Yeah, there's some scratch marks on the case shell right there. That's too bad. Okay, standard BIOS test. I realize you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm going through a quick utility cartridge test, which tests all the buttons, tests the controllers, tests everything else. Let's see, pause button is working okay. Select seems to be okay. Reset seems to be okay. So actually the front panel buttons are all right on this one. However, difficulty switches are crap. And at least player 1's controller. Okay, player 2 is... Player 2's is okay, but player 1's has got some issues on the difficulty switch. So I'll either need to try... I'll try cleaning it first by just spraying some contact cleaner into it and cycling it back and forth a few times. And that usually takes care of it for the most part, but if not, then I'll have to take a switch off of like a donor console. Not a huge ordeal, just one of those things. All right, now let's try the secondary controller port. That's working good. It's important to check that because what can happen is it's possible for... What is going on here? It's caught up on my microphone. Okay. it's possible for the TIA to have a problem, and you might not detect it unless you actually check the second controller port. And if you don't do that, well, then that's a problem. Okay, just checking. It looks like the stream health is good. No problems there. Saying that the audio stream is lower than what they recommend. Is everybody able to hear me okay? If there's anybody watching, I actually don't even know if there is anybody watching. Well, there should be audio all the same, so I mean, I see it coming across in OBS, so I assume it's able to be heard in the stream as well. Let me verify that. Let's see. I'm going to guess it's not going to let me touch this. Okay, the microphone is enabled. Well, I know when I was testing it a second ago, I could hear audio just fine, so I'm not sure why YouTube seems to have a problem with the audio stream. Because again, it seems to be working just fine here. So, okay. Let's see here. That's working. The next thing I need to test. Oops. Hate it when they clack hard together like that. Paddles. Because I have had 7800s that seem to work just great, but then the paddles don't actually work properly. This might just be one of them. All right. We're going to pull that for a second, and instead we're going to use a different. We use a 2600 test image for this that might work better for confirming paddle control. Okay. Okay. I think paddles are working fine. It's just that utility test cartridge just doesn't like it when I plug paddles in. Yeah, paddles are working fine. They're working the way they should be. Good. Okay, now I can turn that off. Apologies. I know that's kind of loud. Go back to the 7800 utility cartridge. Okay. Colors look okay. Internal RAM test passes. Audio test. Okay, we have Pokey audio. No issues there. And then the cartridge integrity test will tell me if the cartridge port's goofy or not. Oh yeah. Yeah. As soon as I touched the cartridge and gave it a tiny little wiggle, the whole thing just crashed. So the cartridge port on this 7800 is definitely in need of a severe cleaning. All right, let's get this. This RF cable's definitely in there. All right, get the power disconnected from it. All right, we're ready to break it down, take it apart. I'm not sure if I'm the first person inside this or not. Oh, it's an A1 unit. That means it should be a fairly early revision. We'll find out when we take the cover off and take the RF off to see what the condition of the chips are as far as the date stamps. I don't think anyone's ever been inside this before. These are cracking. These are cracking fairly well. Removing them. Okay, now take the top lid off. Looks clean inside. The boss posts are in okay shape. I'll probably, if you guys didn't know, the rear boss posts on 7800s are really bad about breaking and cracking, just in general over time. But especially when trying to remove the screws, you have to be careful. Same thing for the boss posts on the sides. They'll crack sometimes. Can't do much about these on the front side, but the ones on the back, what I will do when I usually put one back together is I will use shrink tubing. Obviously, I cut it to the same height of the boss post, but I'll use shrink tubing and usually about 2 layers of shrink tubing to wrap around the posts and reinforce them a little bit. I mean, it's not perfect, but it helps. That way, in case they do crack, the pieces don't go everywhere. It still kind of keeps things intact. So just a little tip I use for 7800 case shell longevity. All right, now let's get this main board out of here. Rest of the case is in good condition. Do see some stress cracks right along the front edge. Not sure. Is that on the bottom as well? You probably can't see that, but there's a little bit of like a facet appearance. I'll see if I can find a better way to adjust this, where there's a crack that goes along the front edge here. So yeah, it's not normal, but I don't see any damage on the other side. So may just be something from the molding from the factory. Okay, 7800. All right, I'm going to need to get some capacitors ready to go. Let's see, that rear one is, I can never remember the values on these, even though I should by now. Yeah, 2216 volts. I think I have one left. Yep, one left. I've got some capacitor kits on order from Console 5, but unfortunately my order from Console 5 has been delayed. I'm not sure why. I believe the other two smaller caps are 220s. I will, of course, need to verify that, but I believe that is what they are. So I believe I've got those in hand. I'll know more when I get the case off. Oh, this is interesting. Maybe I'm not the first person inside of this. Some of these tabs are not twisted. And the ones that are not twisted very much. I also see scratches around them indicating that it has potentially been removed before. That's curious. It's the first time I've had it here. I have not serviced this console before. Yeah, these aren't twisted very much at all. Okay. Should be most of those. Should be able to gently start to pry it loose. Oh yeah. This is gonna come off pretty easily, actually. That's it. It is free. Well, the chips are not socketed. Actually, they look pretty dirty. There's a lot of flux residue on these. Somebody else has definitely been inside this. I wonder what was done with it. Color trimmers, I think, are okay. Yeah, there's a lot of gunk on this. What on earth? Did something spill on this in the past? It's got the standard, well, it's pretty common. I see these Sony video, or these Sony RAM chips on these things pretty often. And they almost always have that resistor on the, I believe that's one of the write enable lines on the, on one of the chips. Only thing I can figure is that was put in place because of the speed of the RAM chip. Okay, well, the bottom has a lot of, yeah, I think this has spillage. I think that's what we're looking at here. This is probably why the cartridge port was not working very well. There's probably a lot of gumminess in it. Yeah, right along here is concentrated a lot of, well, except it's not sticky. It almost looks like, almost like a conformal coating was sprayed on this or something strange. Interesting. Well, I'm not sure what's up with that, but if you take a look at some of the chips, it might be obvious. If I hold this in the light just right, you can see there's a lot of stuff on some of those chips. And I also see the same stuff in various parts of the main board as well, so it definitely looks like something's been on this. Voltage regulator, I think, is original. Maybe. But that will get changed out anyway with a replacement. I've just started by default. I mean, they're not expensive. It's like a $1 part. I just started replacing the voltage regulators out with 2 amp output variable ones. Not that it'll ever do that, because of course it's going to be limited on what the actual power supply provides it, and a 7800 power supply, stock power supply, is only a 1 amp output power supply. But at least this way I know it's got a good, capable voltage regulator in it that can do the job. So amazing that with the spillage on it that these buttons are actually responding okay. So I was talking about the Sony RAM module, or these Sony RAM chips. Let's see, these are 120 nanosecond. But a lot of them will have this resistor, this bodged resistor in here. And although it's not an issue, what I tend to do is I will desolder this leg of the resistor on this side here. And I'll put some shrink tubing over it and then reapply it, reattach it back into place. It just in case. I mean, again, it's obviously it's 40 years old almost, and it's never been a problem, but can't take a chance. So how old is this thing? When was it made? Well, actually, the oh boy, it's got one of the Rockwell CPUs. Okay, so this CPU was made in the 39th week of 1987. The Riot over here shows 32nd week of 87. However, the TIA shows the 15th week of 87. The BIOS seems to be the 27th week of 87. 28th week of 87. I don't see a reliable date code on these, or at least I'm not sure what their numbering convention is. There's no way that this is right. This would almost look like it was the 64th week. Oh, it's the 40th week of 86. Well, that's one of the oldest chips I've found so far. This has an old RCA 4013 on it. Interesting. And then these Sony chips, I've never really been able to decipher their date codes either. Okay, this seems to be the 32nd week of 87. So based on this, and I know somewhere somebody has a diagram or a description of the date code breakout on the Maria chips, but I've never really investigated it much. But just from the other chips that are on here, the chip on here that's got the oldest date stamp would appear to be the CPU with the 39th week of 87 on it. Just double checking. So we could basically get an idea there that, you know, it's from the second half of 1987 is when this was put together. It also has the extra timing circuit enabled. Interesting. That will be getting disabled as part of this service. I always disable the extra timing circuit by default. I don't even mention it to most of my clients. I just do it. The reason is because it will enable a lot of the earlier Activision games for the 2600 to function again that normally have issues when that circuit is in place. But of course, it does come at the expense of causing the 2600 version of Dark Chambers as well as the 2600 version of Kung Fu Master to no longer work. I would argue that that's not a tremendous loss, honestly, because the 7800 versions of those games are better anyway. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, since I've already got this here, is I'm going to go ahead and lift that one leg of this resistor up off of the RAM. And like I said, I'll put some shrink tubing on it. There we go. And let's see, do I already have some shrink tubing in place up here? I sometimes have spare shrink tubing, little bits and pieces that I've cut. I do, but I don't have any that small. So let me get my box of tubes, shrink tubing. Let's see. Let me go through the spare box first. The spare box is where I put miscellaneous sections. There's a nice. That's a nice piece right there. I got some black. I've also got it in some red over here. Let's see. Is this red a little? That's about the right. That's almost exactly the length I need. I think I'm just going to use that red right there. Okay. But of course, to get it slid over that, I am going to have to straighten this out just a little bit. There we go. Reform it back into shape. Okay, it needs to be brought over a little bit more. Okay. And I might even reform it downward so that it's making a better connection to the leg of that chip than it was previously. And I won't even have to worry about using about shrinking the tube up around it because it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to sit there, so it's fine. Get a little bit of fresh solder. And I can usually just do this by hand, just tack it on there like that. Perfect. That's not going anywhere. And again, it's on there more securely than it was originally, so that's good. Now, I used to try to bring this down so that it was a little more lower to the board so it didn't quite sit up as flush or stick up as much as it is right now against the RAM. That's because I would used to install the UAV boards here, as I'm sure you've seen in some of my videos perhaps, or maybe even some other, I don't know if I've live streamed, I think I've live streamed some other stuff with the 7800. Anyway, I no longer have to do that because the UAVs, I no longer install them by wiring them up manually anymore. I don't have to. Again, here's a UAV. I used to essentially install them on top of the RAM module like that. I would just kind of sit it down in place and then just run the wires I needed, the conductors, from the various points off the UAV to the resistor section along here. But I don't have to do that anymore because now I have this. This is my UAV mount boards, and I actually designed these back in June of this year, and had a bunch of them made up. Well, I say a bunch. I had about a dozen of them made up. And it's got quite a few SMD components on it, which I had to hand solder on initially. It just didn't make a lot of sense to spend the extra money to have them assembled for me. So I just went ahead and ordered the stuff I needed and just assembled them myself. So how does this work? Well, it's really easy. I designed it to make installs of the 7800 UAVs not only easier for me, but to provide a more consistent install. So basically the way it's designed is you've got these little legs, you've got these little interconnect pins along here, and there's also two more in the back. Okay, and these correspond to the connection points we need for the UAV, where it solders onto the resistor ladder section here for the video output section, and the two back here are for the audio. And it's really quite simple. The way it works is it basically just has to sit down into place, essentially like that. So what ends up happening is I just have to apply a little bit of solder to the bottom of these legs to attach them to the resistors, as well as on the back here. The rear section is a little trickier to get to because of the fact that I've got the audio adjustment inductor here for the audio tuning. So that's kind of in the way, but it's not too big a deal. I'm able to get in there. And then once you've got that board fully soldered in place, then the UAV itself, well, I don't have this soldered in, so of course it's going to fight me a little bit. Oh, and it helps if I turn it the right way around. And if I'm not doing this at an angle, I'll just have to do it like this. Once it's soldered in, this is a lot easier to put on. There we go. So yeah, once it's all soldered into place, the UAV just sits on top of the board like that, and then I just have to solder on the conductors, the header pins, where they need to appear. And that's it. That basically self-contains the entire UAV install in one little spot. And you know, you can still have the RF modulator in place. It still works. It's pretty much the absolute shortest distance that I can create easily to the points it needs to connect to. And then the output side is really the only tricky part. I usually use something like these 90-degree header pins that I would attach on the back facing away from the UAV. But I can't do that with these installs now because of the RF modulator board here. The interconnect board for the RF modulator is kind of in the way. So what ends up happening is I actually install these pins now facing in the other direction, and now when everything gets plugged in, it's essentially plugged in over the UAV, but it can come back through here and out through the opening pretty easily in the RF shielding, which is nice because, or actually I'll sometimes attach it and then wrap it around this way along the side. The point is I don't have to cut the RF shielding anymore, which I used to do that. I used to have to cut part of the RF shielding. I would actually remove the section of the RF shielding over here for my previous installs, because again, when the UAV was sitting here, output was here, the wire would come back through and over and down and around. But I don't have to do that now because there's actually plenty of space around this RF modulator section already removed on the back of the RF shielding to place the wire through. So that's another time-saving step. Another thing I can use for the output, I don't do this too often, mainly just because I don't have a lot of them and they're a little trickier to solder up together. But the other thing I can do is, and I just don't have enough of these, is I can use these JST connectors as well. So I can actually use these and solder one of those into place on the back. And then of course I use the corresponding female connection to plug onto that for my wires. So that's also nice, but I just don't have a lot of these, and they're kind of pricey. I have a lot of the DuPont connectors on the other hand, so that's just typically what I use. Okay, so that's the basic of how the UAV gets installed now. It's very quick, very easy. In addition, on this board, I already have the ChromaFix circuit incorporated on it. And for those that aren't aware, the ChromaFix really isn't anything sophisticated at all. It's a dead simple circuit. All we're doing is we are taking the chroma signal, the color signal, from off the Maria chip. And before we actually send it to the UAV, we're actually sending it through a couple of gates on a 4050 chip. And that's what this is. This is a surface mount 4050. Purposely to delay that signal by about 150 milliseconds. And that is enough to bring that color signal more in sync with the Luma signals so that we don't have the color streaking and bleeding that can occur on 7800s. It's still there on some of the really darker, lower hue colors, but it's much reduced compared to what it was normally. And just in general, just improves the clarity overall of the image output, really. And then I've also got a replicated set of resistors right here, in addition to another filter cap for the audio. So I don't have to do the old method where I used to solder on 2 additional resistors over here with another capacitor and then run my audio line that way. Again, once this is all into place, all I have to do is I've got a single pad here for my audio output, and I just have to run that to the center jack of the RCAs or whatever output I'm going to be using for that. So yeah, it's much handier. So I've just incorporated everything that used to be broken out as separate parts and would have to be installed separately across the system. I've just put it all into this one little mount board. Now it's not the most fun to solder these up, especially these pins, and make sure everything's lined up. That can be rather tricky, but it's not impossible. And I actually just had an order come in yesterday for more of them right here. So this is how they are when they're unpopulated, nothing on them. So I've got those, and I've got components that already came in from Mouser for me to make some more up. So, and then I just need to order some more UAVs. All right, so those other caps, was I right about those? Are those 220s? Let me get that mount board off of here for a second. Yes, they're 220 microfarad, 16 volt. I was correct. Okay. I was pretty sure they were, but I wanted to double check. Let me see what I have on hand since my capacitor kits have not come in from console 5. I don't know that I've got all of these. I may have to do that part later. Do I not have what I need? Not bad, that would do the job. There's a 220, there's a 220 microfarad, but it's 25 volts, but that's not a problem. Most of the ones I have on hand for some odd reason are 35 or only like 6.3 volts. They're not 16 or greater. There's a 16 volt. That's a 220 16. That could be used. It's actually an exact match. Let's see, do I have another one hiding in here? What's this one? What is this one? Nope, 226.3. It's not what I need. Well, I may just have to use these two. One's bigger than the other because it's rated for more voltage. It's rated for 25 volts, but it's still the same capacitance, and as long as it meets or exceeds the voltage requirements, it'll be fine. So yeah, they might not match up 100%, but it'll be fine. They'll work just as well. And then I've got my last remaining 220 16 volts sitting right there. So some might be asking, is there a problem with the capacitors on this board? Well, no, not that I can really see. Obviously it's working, they look okay, but they are almost 40 years old. And electrolytic capacitors do have finite lifespans. So it's never a bad idea to replace them out. They're not the cure-all for all issues, of course, but this is more of a preventive measure, preventive maintenance measure. I mean, again, this person, the owner, has sent this to me to get upgraded with the UAV and other services. And so it's just a good practice. Just go ahead and get these capacitors replaced. It's not that expensive. I think the capacitor kit for this is like $3 from Console 5, and the bulk of that expense is probably the large filter cap here. So it's not a huge expense, really. It's minor. So, yep. I'm going to go ahead and apply some fresh solder to all of the capacitors. I realize you cannot see exactly what I am doing, but I don't know if you could tell or not, but I've done a few of these, so I'm pretty familiar with where everything's laid out. Okay, let's see. Yep, negatives always point towards the back, with this one off to the side. So, getting my trusty silver Sharpie. There's my negative there. There's my negative there. And this is my negative here. This isn't always true, but it's frequently true that on capacitors, usually the negative is attached to ground in a lot of places, especially if they're being used for power bypass filtering type situations. So, yeah. Oh, and I'm going to have to clean that cartridge port out. So let me go ahead and remove the old masking tape that is covering over the screws. It's nice if I can get this tape off in one piece, but that doesn't usually happen. Not sure why it was there. I'm going to guess that at one point in time it may have been perhaps double-sided sticky, and they used it to hold the retaining bracket that the screws go into in place or something. I'm not entirely sure what its purpose was. I assume it had one. I doubt they put it on there just to hide the screws, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. But I don't know, maybe. Maybe they didn't want people messing with it. These screws are kind of small, so you need like a number 1 or better yet, a number 0 Phillips to get them out of there. Which is what I'm using here. I believe this is a 0. Well, it's rubbed off on the top now. Can't see it, but I'm pretty sure this is a 0. Size 0 Phillips. And then from there, the cartridge port, once you've got the screws removed, you just push in on the tabs, and the sleeve just pops right off. Then I always have to check the inside, make sure there's no spider nest or spider eggs or spider nests hiding in there. Found it more than once. Cartridge contacts. Actually, they're really shiny. They look nice, so I'm not sure why it's doing what it is. They don't look too worn, but we're gonna clean out the cartridge port anyway. It's just part of things. There's some more of the sticker that was underneath the that was blocking those screws, like I said before. And again, I assume it was double-sided sticky, and it may have held this little plastic bracket in place or something. I'm not real sure, again, what the purpose of that tape was. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm also going to replace out the voltage regulator. It's obviously easier to get to it if I have the cartridge sleeve removed, although it's still not 100% easy to get to. This needs a type 1 or type 0 as well. Okay, there's that. All of that. I need to break this old gunk off of here. That's stuck on there pretty good. There we go. Okay. Gross. Let's see, I have. Is there any particular place to purchase a UAV installation service from you? Oh, well, if you actually go to the About section of the YouTube channel and go through, their usual rigmarole to confirm you're not a robot and all that stuff, you will have access to my email address. So just shoot me an email, letting me know what you're interested in. Make sure you include your name. And I can give you more information about it, and and give you the ballpark pricing as well. I do have, because I've done so many 7800 UAVs now, I've got a flat fee I basically have for all of these, and it's not too much. I mean, it includes, of course, cross-charging the cost of parts as far as the UAV and the mount board goes. But I don't put a massive markup on them. I just round all of my parts costs up to the next nearest dollar. So. In the case of the capacitor kits, let's say it's $3, and then I'm just going to charge $3. I might charge $5 actually for that because I'll charge $2 to change them out. So a lot of my parts costs actually have some labor already included in that. So it's just ballpark figures really. But I mean it's not unreasonable. I don't think. I've even been told by others that do this more full time that I probably don't charge enough, especially for the amount of time I spend, but that's okay. I mean, I don't do this to make a living. I do this because it's fun. This is my method of relaxation, and I like being able to help out and provide services for people. All right, let's go ahead and get these caps off first. So, got my desoldering iron ready to go. Loud noises. If that's loose enough. Yep. It just fell out. Get this next one. That just fell out. They are removed. Okay. Now, of course, we want to clean up the spots. Cool, I'll send an email when I'm done cooking. Okay. I will tell you that because I don't do this full time and I have a normal day job, that means that I only usually take on a couple of console requests at a time because I don't like any of my clients to have to wait long to get their stuff back from the time they send it to me. So I have a pretty strict, I say strict because I'm strict on myself about this. I have a pretty strict 2-week turnaround policy. So but the only way to make that happen, the only way to make that possible is to only accept a few systems at a time. So why am I mentioning that? I'm mentioning that because I'm pretty much already booked up for the rest of this month, and I've already got a couple of people signed up for the first of the year. So, but having said that, I have a lot of people that will contact me. They'll be like, "Hey, I want to get these services done." I'm like, "Cool, let me know. Hit me up in 2 weeks. See where I'm at schedule-wise to see when I can fit you in." And they're like, "Okay, all right, sounds good." And what happens? I don't hear from them. So I don't know if they just have other priorities that come up, or if they forget, or if they find someone else who's more available. And that's fine. I mean, it's not a competition. It just, you know, again, I do this in my free time when I can. And that's currently, for the most part, that's going to be weekends and outside of work, after work. Speaking of which, I just realized I don't have my phones with me, and I should, because I'm technically on call. That's not good. All right, so yeah, those are pretty nasty. I don't know what's on this board. I may have to take it out in the garage a little bit later after I get these capacitors replaced, and see about hitting it with my good contact cleaner spray or something. Get it. I've got some flux spray I use. This might be flux, but man, there's a lot of it if it is. I don't know. But it's not super sticky like I would expect if it was old, like soda or something like that that had been spilled on it. There's just so much of it, it's crazy. Okay. This little guy is fine. We'll just pop him in where he needs to go. Okay, we'll need to form the legs out a little bit. I usually like to have better access to the positive terminal or the positive lead. There we go. It's going to work really well. And then what I'll do to get this tacked into place here a little bit is I'll just, wow, those leads are longer than I thought. Let's get those. Okay. I'll just set that like that, and I can tack down this positive lead. That way it's held into place, and now I can more easily get the rest of it soldered in from the bottom. Okay. Get those trimmed off. Good. That one's in place. We'll get this next one in place. This one might already have the leads just about where they need to be. I may not have to reform these too much. Yeah. That's good. That will be fine. Make sure it's still sitting good on the board. Sometimes after I get one leg soldered in, they'll migrate, they'll move on me a little bit. Okay. This one's got a nice long lead on it. I like to keep leads that are fairly thick and of a certain length, because you never know when you might need them for trace repair. Yeah. This one should just fit directly over as well, pretty decently. It's a little bit off to the side. So, same as before, I will reform this lead just a little bit. I'm doing that because I don't want to stress the leads too much. I don't want them to try and bend and pull out of the capacitor. That would be not good. All right. This is kind of everywhere, isn't it? Let's get this. Okay. I realize you probably aren't going to be able to see most of this. My apologies. Get this up a little higher. And we'll put a little bit of flux on this one. It's a fairly large trace. So same thing, I'm just going to try to tack in a little bit of solder on the top side of my positive. Like that. Hopefully that's enough to... Nope, actually didn't make contact. Darn it. Let's try that again. I think that got it. Yeah. Not a ton, but it's on there. Now I can more easily solder the bottom side. Hello everyone. Yes. Keep those leads, they come in handy. Yes, they do. I've got a small stockpile of them. I've got one of the little wells over here on this mat is almost just full of different leads. Different sizes, different lengths. And just in case that's not enough, I also have like a small electronics tackle box that's got quite a few leads in it also. Now these leads off of these caps I always keep because they're nice and thick. They work really good for trace repair for larger traces. Or if you're breadboarding something up yourself specific, they're handy for that as well. Man, this thing is just dirty on the bottom. I think what I'm going to have to do a little bit later on after I get these components changed out is I'm going to go ahead and I'll take it out to the garage and I'll just hose this thing down with my flux remover and see if that gets some of this off. I'll at least know if it's flux or not. It's just not sticky like flux. But once I hit it with the alcohol, that's a whole other story because this is really sticky now since I sprayed down some alcohol. So it probably is flux. But man, that is bad. I mean, I've seen a lot of flux from Atari consoles from Atari, but this is probably easily one of the worst. I mean, it's so bad, it's like caked on over here and crusty. Wow. That is just not good. Let's get that voltage regulator off of there. Again, this is actually working just fine, but I have seen 7800s just up and fail out of the blue. Because the voltage regulators on these were just, I don't know, they're just preventive maintenance. Again, the voltage regulator is like a $1 part, if that. I mean, buy it in bulk, it's even less than that. So, it's not a huge deal to change them out. There we go. Nice and old, crusty paste. We're going to get this old stuff wiped off of here. Of course, it's just going to smear around for the most part. There we go. Okay. Another Q-tip. Some alcohol. IPA would be the more proper way to say that. Okay. That gets it off the heat sink. Get that nice and clean, and then I will also use the other end and clean up the vias. One of my 7800s got badly disfigured because of the traces. How do you mean disfigured? Can you describe that one to me a little bit? It turns on, but it goes black, sometimes white, and when you see stripes, no color. Okay, so you're indicating that it's just not working basically because of like some corrosion on the traces. Is that what you're talking about? Which traces was it that were affected? I'm just curious. I really think this might just be old flux. Wow, that's just nasty. Nasty, nasty, nasty stuff. Break out the toothbrush and yeah, there's a bunch of it right here that just will not come off. But so I'm not gonna be able to get this board 100% super clean. I know that, you know, somebody with more financial backing than myself would probably have a good ultrasonic cleaner that they could throw this whole board into, and that would certainly get it nice and clean. I don't have that. I've looked into them, but I'm just not sure how much I would really use it, and I'd have to get a pretty sizable one to handle most sized boards from these old classic systems. You know, the 7800 is one of the smaller boards, you know, but even a 2600 board is almost the same size. So, not really giving myself much of an advantage there. Let's see, that Q-tip is also gone. Got to always have a lot of Q-tips on hand, just all the time. Q-tips. Let's see, I need to get that flux off from where I soldered that larger cap earlier. Spray that down. Okay, there we go. All right, I'm going to need a voltage regulator. What do we got? Trace loss due to trace loss due to a hot iron. Okay. Almost everywhere. I'm not sad at all knowing I screwed it up. My other 7800's in good shape. Gotcha. Well, I mean, as far as the iron goes, this is why, you know, you really have to have a temperature adjustable soldering iron if you're going to do any kind of work like this, either as a hobbyist or, you know, professionally, of course. You have to have a temperature adjustable iron. I actually use a really old Hacko 936 station that I've had for, oh, maybe about 12 years now, I guess. And it came with the 907 soldering wand. And it's been a wonderful workhorse. Now, it's not as cool as newer ones because it doesn't have a digital adjustment for the temperature. It's just got a knob. And some people would be like, well, that's where the digitals come out ahead because, you know, you can be sure that you're getting the exact temperature output that you have set. And I don't disagree with that. That's a perfectly valid statement. However, it is much easier for me to just quickly turn the dial where I need to, wait a few seconds, and I know that this iron is going to be essentially where I need it to be. Now, in case you're curious, a majority of the solder work that I do, when it comes to the board soldering, I will use I will usually use about 350 Celsius, which is give or take, let's see, what's that going to be? That's going to be about, it's about 650 Fahrenheit, more or less. I mean, there's a few differences there. But yeah, about 350 Celsius for most of the board level work. When I'm soldering on the conductors, the actual wires to components, because I want to minimize how much of the wire insulation melts or shrinks back on me, I will do most of that at 325. And of course, to make that possible, you have to have solder that will melt at those lower temperatures. I think the solder I buy usually melts at about 280, if I'm not mistaken. So, and that's Celsius again. Now, if I'm working on something where I have to solder onto one of these ground traces, well, then it's not unusual for me to crank the iron up to about 400 Celsius, or almost 800, like 425 Celsius, almost 800 Fahrenheit. So yeah, that's very rare. I don't do that. Again, that's for larger traces. All right, I need to get a 7805 2 amp output. Do I have 1 amp outputs? Yes, I just don't use them as much because 350. Okay, because there's very little price difference between the 1 amp and 2 amp output regulators. I mean, we're talking, what is it, 10 or 15 cents at most. So it's just easier to just use 2 amp output 7805s. That's it's just easier for me to just stock just the one thing pretty much. All right, now to get this lined up, what I will do is and I actually will do this in the other direction. Originally when Atari installed these, they had the screw on the inside. I do it the other way around to make it easier in the future if it needs to be gotten to. I will be applying paste, some new thermal paste to this, but for the time being, to get it soldered into place, I will loosely screw it back down, anchor it back down into place where it needs to be so I get the height right on the heatsink. Good. All right. Now I can go ahead and solder it into place. It also holds it in place. See, I will use a little bit of flux for this as well. I want to make sure it gets in there. It's where it needs to go. I, of course, have, this solder I use does have flux core, but it's never a bad idea to use a little bit more. Just got to clean it up. Nice. Solder came through on both sides just like I need. And then I will trim these leads. The original one did not have the leads trimmed very much, if at all, but I always do. There we go. And again, we clean it off. Cool. Okay, now that's soldered in, I can loosen this back up and apply some new thermal paste. I dipped my hand a little too much. Honestly, I attempted to replace 6532 chip and put a socket, and when I placed a new chip, it happened everything I described. Also, I used a new 14 megahertz oscillator. 6532. Are we talking about? Oh, are you talking about the CPU? The 6502? Perhaps? I've only had to replace the crystal once on a 7800, and it was actually a very strange situation. The 7800 actually worked. What was going on was a couple of games that I tested with it, Ball Blazer being the main one, was exhibiting and showing a whole lot of weird graphic anomalies. And I couldn't figure out what that was all about. And turned out, trying 2 other crystals on it, finally got rid of it. They were all listed and rated to be the same, but yet, obviously they weren't. Something was different between them. Shouldn't have been an issue. It should have just worked, but yeah, it just didn't. So, but I've only had to do that once, so that's not a common situation for me. This popped in here. Get that little lock ring back into place. And of course I can only tighten up by hand so far. All right, now I need these small pliers just to hold it into place. That's tighter than it was originally. Good. I see paste has squeezed out all around the edges a little bit. I'm good with that. Okay, what else from here? I've got caps replaced. Let's go ahead and clean that cartridge port. All right, so for the cartridge port, I just got a little bit of this tuner cleaner spray. I just shoot in there directly into the port. And I use a cut-up credit card. This is not a real one. This is one of those fake ones that you get in the mail. But the plastic on it's pretty sturdy stuff. So I just have this one here. I just cut it to shape. And then I use an old t-shirt, old cotton t-shirt, like this. So I've got the credit card portion in here. And then I just take this and just start jamming it in and out of the slot. The two side slots, because they're much smaller, I've got a separate piece of plastic I've cut just for those. So I'll do that here in a little bit. Actually not looking too bad. Well, And then here's the smaller one that I cut for the sides. And then to finish it off, I will take the alcohol and shoot that into the slots. And that does two things. It helps to the contact cleaner evaporate a little faster, and of course, you know, a little more cleaning. About time for me to wash this shirt or start to use a new one. I'm starting to run out of clean spots. That alcohol will give me the nice squeaky clean. Okay. And then do the same on the sides. $6507 on the 2600. It's a 6502 on the 7800 and 8-bit computers and the 5200 actually. They call it the Sally. Or at least the Atari version of it was referred to as the Sally CPU. But it's the 6507, which is the modified 6502, feature reduced version of the 6502 that's used in the 2600. This is actually a 6502. And again, this one's using a Rockwell one. I also don't see a de-glitch cap added to this one. It's not common, but some earlier, I usually see this on the earlier ones, like the 84, 86 made units. There'll be a small, what is it? I want to say it's like a 100 nanofarad or even smaller. It might even be something like an 800 picofarad capacitor. It'll look like a resistor, but it's one of the small green banded capacitors that'll be attached off of, I want to say, pin 25. Yeah, it'll be attached off of pin 25 off the CPU here, around this area, and then the other end will be attached to this ground trace right underneath it. Again, it's not on every one I've seen, but I have seen it. So if you ever turn one over and you see a weird, what looks like a resistor, but it's actually a banded capacitor attached, don't touch it, leave it. That was applied by the factory because they detected timing issues with certain games graphically from the CPU. Later made schematics that I've looked at that were dated around 2003 actually show the capacitor in the schematic. They show it attached off the address 15 line of the CPU. But you can technically apply it in a couple of different places. That capacitor, again, could be applied off of, again, I think it's pin 25 off the CPU to ground. It can also be applied off of pin 30 to the ground off of the Maria because those are directly in line. And I think you can also attach it off of, is it pin 20? I think it might be pin 20 off the BIOS. Those are the three locations where address 15 is used. And the schematic I have looks like it shows it coming off the BIOS side, but I usually see it when it's attached. It's off of the 6502. Okay. So you were talking about a 2600, and yes, that has the 6507. Oh, your broken console has that capacitor, so it has that deglitch cap added to it? Got it. And speaking of capacitors, in fact, this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. This is C64. This is the capacitor that ties the extra timing circuit together to everything else. It looks like a resistor, but it is not. This is a banded ceramic capacitor, and Atari was famous for using these all over the place. I'm not sure why, unless it was because they were hoping to maybe confuse their competitors. If they were getting shots of the main board, they might think they were resistors when in fact they were capacitors. But anyway, to remove the extra timing circuit from this and improve the compatibility with the majority of 2600 games, all I have to do is just lift I usually lift the right side leg. Of course, in the video here, it's at the bottom, but I use this, I just remove this here. If removed, games like Pole Position will lock up. Oh, you're talking about the deglitch cap on the bottom? Yes. Pole Position is one of the other games I have seen some graphical issues with. But Ball Blazer is the one I usually use for testing to really see if that is a problem or an issue. I have even added it to some 7800s that I thought might need it because they were exhibiting some slight issues with the graphics and ended up with the 7800 no longer booting up. I was like, what? So, you know, it's apparent to me it wasn't an automatic thing Atari did. I'm sure they had to test it or test for the need for that capacitor to be added at the factory during the construction. All right, let's go ahead and get that capacitor leg removed, and it is not straight. I was hoping it would be straight through, but it's not. They did bend it a little bit. I could just clip it. A lot of people will just cut this thing and just call it good. I don't. I will actually desolder it and remove it out of circuit like that. And then I will bend the leg just a little bit. And then I apply some shrink tubing over it. That's what I do. I'm going to need another piece, a different piece. And this is just so if somebody wants to in the future, although I can't imagine why they would, but if they want to in the future, they can quite easily reattach this capacitor back in the circuit. Again, for my testing physically here, it only affects 2600 dark chambers and Kung Fu Master, 2600 version of Kung Fu Master. The cool thing about the Kung Fu Master issue is that you will actually think there's a problem and might hit that with a little bit of heat. Usually it'll stay on there pretty good, but I'm gonna put some heat on it just to be on the safe side. With Kung Fu Master, you'll just get a black screen, but if you actually push that capacitor with your hand, the image suddenly comes up. So it's not that the system's locked up or that it's not running, it actually is, but you just don't really see it. There, I don't want to shrink it down all the way, just enough to hold it into place, so it's not going to come loose very easily. See, that's not going to It still slides off, so if somebody needed to, they could get it off of there, but it's held in place. It's not gonna go anywhere. So it's actually being held in place by this other resistor right here, which is nice. Okay, that's the bulk of preemptive stuff. I guess what I'll do now is I'll give this another quick test. So, hold on my microphone there a little bit. Let's get this. Let's get a non-conductive surface in place. And again, I will use my wire harness so I can power it with a Genesis power supply. And I don't have the UAV in place yet, so we're going to still have to go off of RF for the time being. And again, why am I doing this? I know it worked. Well, you know, I made some changes to it, right? I did some service here. I wanted to test it again. I want to make sure it's still going to work okay. I'm also going to give it the cartridge wiggle test, as I call it. I think some people report that dark chambers don't work with certain consoles. That's not my case. Dark chambers for the 2600 does work usually on 7800s. And again, Atari added the extra timing circuit, I think specifically for dark chambers, but a couple of other games are apparently affected by it. Again, I know for a fact that Kung Fu Master for the 2600 will not fire up on any 7800 if that capacitor is removed from circuit. It works on other 7800s that don't have it in place. So again, it's a variance of the hardware. Okay, system came up. Go back to the cartridge integrity test. Now I'm wiggling the cartridge and it is not locking up. And I do not have any red squares showing up on my cartridge integrity test as it scans through all the memory readings. So yeah, really give it some wiggle. Yeah, that's we're good. That cartridge slot is clean. And the console still works, so no issues there. All right. Let's see. I'm going to clean up the difficulty switches. Because again, they were a little, especially player ones was a little sketchy. And then I tend to hit the controller pins as well. And then we'll get some alcohol. Excuse me. All right. Switches feel better too. Nice satisfying clicks. Just kind of wipe off the residue. I don't worry about removing the contact cleaner on this as much because it also helps to kind of lubricate the switch naturally. So I'm not as concerned with spraying some alcohol in that. They tend to work better long term. And I'm not going to bother with the channel select switch because, I mean, it's not as satisfying a click as these are, but it's working fine, and it's not likely to be changed much. In fact, the owner of this console, once they get it back, they may never ever use the RF output again, and that's up to them. It still works. It will still work when this is done, but they may not want to ever use it. Okay, let's see. That brings us to the UAV mount board. So the only other additional step I have to apply on this is the power and ground. Now on this, there's a couple of ways you can do this. I actually have a 5 volt and ground vias on here. So you could install or solder wiring on here separately and then solder it onto the 5 volt and ground main rails through the center of the board. That's certainly a possibility. You could actually go ahead and solder all of this in place, and then when you put the UAV on top, you can actually then just solder wires to the +5 and ground on the UAV if you want, and that will provide all the power needed to everything else also. What I do is I actually use a 90-degree, is that one of my large ones? Nope, that's, well it is, but this will work. I'll use these 90-degree headers, and what I will do is I will actually solder this to the 5 volt and ground pins on the RF modulator. For those that may not be aware, the 5 volt, this first pin here is always ground, and the second pin next to it is your +5. Now, I have seen people solder wires to another location for +5. I want to say it's this one here on the bottom. That is only going to provide +5 when the channel switch is in the opposite position. Yeah, that's how the RF modulator knows to switch over to the other channel, is when you flip the switch, you actually complete an additional 5 volt circuit to this bottom pin. So if you want to make sure you always have 5 volts where you need using these pins, then always use the second pin. And I have not seen that deviate on any 7800s so far. So just something to be aware of. Now, to get that attached can be a little trickier. What I have to do is apply a little bit of solder to the top of those pins first. And that sometimes helps if I actually scrape them a little bit. So let me flip this over a little bit and just kind of scrape the tops. Because they might have some gunk on them. You know, we've already seen flux in other parts of this board, so all right. And get the soldering iron out. That will happen. It does like to bridge on me sometimes. What happened to that? This will work. There we go. No more bridge. Next trickiest part is getting this in place. Again, this is not the easiest way to do this, but this is how I do it. I'll actually use this one. This one will work fine. Okay, now this is gonna hurt. I'll need to hold this in place while I do this. Easiest way to do this is just to solder one side on and then tack on the other. If I can hold my hand steady enough. Okay, that one's on. All right, it's on there, but I am going to apply some additional solder to it to make absolutely sure. Okay. All right. That should not be going anywhere. Yeah, that's nice and secure. And then I can just take the UAV mount board. Now by default, it won't fit up just right, so what I have to do, it's off by 1 pin, so I find that I have to take these headers and I just have to bend them back a little bit. There we go. Maybe just a tiny bit more. Okay. This also helps to anchor this mount board into place where I need it to go to help me solder it in. Okay, that one's in place, and then I'll do the other one over here. This is the one for the TIA color connection. And then I just go down the line. That one's fighting me a little bit. I have to come back to that one. So is that one. Well, some of these resistors can get kind of corroded on top and they don't want to take the solder very well, so let's put some flux down in here. Those ones on the end didn't work out too bad. Those worked out all right. Never mind, no space for that. Hold on, I'll go for my console. I think some people reported that dark chambers. Okay, hold on, I'll go for my console. Never mind, no space for that. Small board comes with the UAV? No. This mount board does not come with a UAV by default. I mean, I provide it because I have them made up and I hand solder them. But when you order a UAV from the Brewing Academy, it does not come with the mount board. No. I have talked to the Brewing Academy to look into that as a possibility, and they are interested, but nothing yet. Okay, that one seems to have gone in just fine. This one here is not cooperating. Okay, I think that'll work. I do have a way to test that. Because there are test points along here that you can check for continuity to make sure everything's where it needs to be. I also need to get my audio in place. This one's a little trickier because, again, I don't have nearly as much room to work with. So I basically have to come at it from this angle. There we go. And that board is now soldered into place. So again, with this in, it's not going anywhere. It's nice and secure. Oh, I did forget one other thing. I have to solder on the 5-volt and ground at the top. Make sure you have everything soldered into place, because once you install the UAV on top of it, you're not going to be able to easily access any of this. All right. And then the UAV will just sit on like that. Now, I actually use these, the header connect pins that I use are tapered in such a way that it should be possible to actually set the UAV like that temporarily and actually be able to hold it into place while you test it to make sure everything's going to work. What does what do? What does the small mount board do? Well, for starters, it makes it easier once you've got the board in place for consistent installation of your UAV, because it is possible. I've seen people install the UAV by just wiring everything directly, and they'll frequently get confused with the placement of where the wires might need to go, the conductors need to go on these vias. All of the wiring to the UAV on a 7800 needs to go to the center smaller set of vias. But I have seen people get confused and install one or two of those conductors on the outer vias, which are actually for use with an interconnect, with some interconnect header pins for 4050 chip installations for like on the 8-bit computers and the 5200. And the 6 switch, the earlier 6 switches, 2600s. So this just eliminates that guesswork by having it sit where it needs to, and then you can easily solder the pins where you need to in place so you know everything's going to line up. It also incorporates the extra needed components for audio right here. Because normally to get the Pokey and the TIA audio in balance, or to get them properly balanced on your outputs, you really need to replicate another 6.8K and 18K resistors off of the originals, unless you're going to remove the RF modulator. If you remove the RF modulator, then you can actually just lift off these two pins, the actual leads off the board here as they face towards the back for R5 and R6, and you can attach a capacitor off of that. And I've seen plenty of people do that. But as I try to leave the RF modulator intact, it's good for troubleshooting, because if for some reason you've got the UAV in and you've got it soldered up to it, or you've got everything in place, you've got it on a TV, it's not working, then you want to make sure that the problem isn't the 7800 itself. And the easiest way to do that is to just attach off the RF. And if you've got picture and everything seems to be working off the RF, well, then you can isolate the problem of your install to being on the UAV side. So it's just, again, it's just a troubleshooting method, you know, or another tool for troubleshooting. So I like to keep the RF intact whenever possible. But if you remove the RF, it is actually a lot easier to solder everything down into place because you have a lot more room. And in fact, with those resistors completely removed, if you wanted to, you can actually set the audio easily more into place. You know, so there's advantages if you remove the RF modulator. It gives you more room, but I designed it so it didn't have to be. And then the second thing it adds is right here, you'll see there's a tiny little chip here, and I actually explained this at the beginning of the video. It incorporates what's known as the chroma fix. So by default on the 7800, the chroma signal is slightly out of sync with the luma signals that come off of the Maria chip. It doesn't affect the 2600 side, it's mainly just the 7800 side. But as a result of this, it can result in some of the darker colors having some smeariness to them on contrasting colors, or near contrasting colors. So the chroma fix helps realign that signal into place. It's not perfect, it's not 100%, because again, we're talking about analog stuff here, and there's always going to be some variance. But it greatly helps. I'm using a 10K trim pot for the audio that I already tested because I'm using other methods, although I ordered the UAV, but that's for my 5200. Gotcha. So on the 5200 side, the audio, I don't do anything sophisticated there. In fact, I just had sitting here, right here we go. So on the 5200, I will actually do something like this. What this is a 2K resistor and another 10 microfarad capacitor that I've got in line. And I will attach this off of the top of R50 on the 5200 to get audio from. It's still a little hot as far as the signal goes, but once you've got it attached to some external speakers or to AV receiver, then the output peak to peak of the audio is about 1.5 volts. So that kind of drops it down to what we would call prosumer levels at that point. So, but in the case of the 7800, you don't have to worry about that. If you're reusing the resistors, or if you use the mount board like I have here, where I've replicated the 6.8 and the 18K resistors as these small surface mounts, and another capacitor here for last ditch filtering on the audio. And then I just have an audio output pad here. So you would just run that to the center RCA jacks, or to or to whatever you're going to use. Like, maybe you're going to use some sort of a multi-pin AV type connector for whatever reason. Then you would run your audio wire from that to that. And then ground you can get from anywhere. So anyway, so what I'm going to do right now before I attach the UAV is I'm going to verify that these connections are meeting up where they need to in other places. So let me get my meter here in beep mode. And the first thing I will do is go ahead and confirm that 5 volt and ground is good to go. This is actually a ground pin right here. This is 5 volts. So those are connected, no problem. Here's my TIA color. Here's a test pad for that, so that's definitely soldered into place, no problem there. This is pin 0, which I think I can test right there. This is pin 3, which can be tested over here. This is going to be 2, which tests right next to it. And I believe this is the sync. Now, unfortunately, sync and 1 cannot be tested from easy test points. There are test points, but they are actually covered by this capacitor and this resistor. Very annoying. So I really don't have an easy way to test those. So what I do is I'll actually touch at the base of the resistor up close to the package, to the ceramic, to make sure that that's making connectivity. Yep. So we should be good. Yeah, I want to say that the test pad for 1 is hiding right about there somewhere. I mean, it would be possible to desolder and move these over a little bit so you could access them, but it's not critical. Now, as far as audio is concerned, I'm just going to have to take my best guess on that, but it should be okay. What I can do to verify, though, is I can put my meter back into ohms. And if I touch from one point here to the top where I soldered it into place, I should be reading... That looks like it's only registering about 12. That should be 16 or 18. Huh. Did Atari decide last minute to do something different with this one? Is this one? This one's still... Okay, that one, they only put a 6K on this. And they only put about a 12 on this. So the TI-8 audio is going to be ridiculously loud on this. That's okay. I mean, it's connected up. That's what matters. So I know I'm good there. Again, I've changed it out with an 18 here. Yeah. And also from here. Yeah. That's a 6.8, that's an 18. So that's all matching up exact. And I use 1% resistors for that, although I think Atari only used maybe 5% value. All right, so everything I need initially should be soldered into place minus my audio. I'm not as concerned about that. So what I want to do real quick is I want to get some pins soldered onto the UAV. And I will need to reform those pins upwards a little bit just to help me out. There we go. I'm being able to connect to them more easily. All right, so I'm going to get this soldered on. And it's critical that you get your output pins put in place before you install the UAV, because you're not going to be able to get to the bottom of the UAV to do this later, unless you just solder output wires from the top. I guess you could do that as well, but the UAV has got a very substantial ground plane on it, because it can be kind of tough to get that initial ground wire soldered in to stay. Okay. This is going to move around too much. Let me get something to set this down onto. Help me solder those into place a little bit. I need it to stay. Oh, it's still going to move around too much. Oh, hey, cool, it melted into it. Usually doesn't fight me this much, because I usually have the pins on, like a bunch of 2600s I've been doing lately. The pins are going in the other direction, so I can actually put them in my helping hands to hold it in place a little better. I could do it with this one as well, but the focus would be all out of whack if I do that. Okay. Those should be in. All right. And of course I want to clean that up, because that looks gross. Lots of leftover flux. That's better. All right. Now I can assemble this enough to be able to push down on it and be able to test it. I'm not going to be able to really show you guys that, because I just don't have an easy way to angle my camera around for that purpose, but I'll be able to know. Let's see. And I use wire harnesses. Do the Pokey Audio require a resistor? On the 7800, I would suggest it, yes. If you don't, what can happen is, first of all, the TIA definitely needs a resistor. The TIA audio is just ridiculously overdriven from the 7800. So you definitely need that 18K resistor for the TIA. As far as the Pokey goes, if you don't use a resistor, it will be okay, but it will actually overpower the TIA in that respect. And in some instances, you might have situations, depending on the flash cartridge. As an example, the Dragonfly cartridge, which I own, really is spec'd and does all of its audio based off of the original Atari mixing circuit. So if you use different value resistors with a Dragonfly, what will probably happen is you will probably only hear Pokey audio from the Dragonfly and not hear the TIA, because the Dragonfly actually amplifies the Pokey output signal, because it's using a Pokey Max in it, not an actual Pokey chip. So the impedance is going to be different on that. Anyway, yeah, I just recommend, again, that, and that's what I've done here, is I've just replicated the two original resistors that are on the board here. I've just got them duplicated up here as surface mounts, in addition to this capacitor here for my output, just to make sure that it's still exactly what the original spec was. And then to test it, I've got my little S-Video harness here. So even though I haven't soldered the UAV into place, I should be able to push down on it, and it'll still make it should still make contact with the pins enough that I can get a picture. And that way I know that everything's in place and I should be okay before I solder everything down. So let me just kind of move this off to the side a little bit so I can, my S-video cable doesn't have a ton of length here. Get this cartridge, get some power. Just held back a sneeze because I didn't want to scare anybody. Okay. Switch my monitor to my S-video input. There we go. Power on. Down into place. Yep, there we go. I have to really hold down onto it to get a picture, but it's definitely there. It's got some vertical lines to it. The ground and such is not great because, again, I'm just holding the board into place here. But it's enough for me to see a picture and to know that it should be good. I'm going to go to the color test. Yeah, that looks good. So, yeah, this UAV is functioning. You might ask yourself, why would I even need to test the UAV board? Well, it's rare, but out of about, I've installed probably close to 120 UAV boards now in various consoles. Most of those I bought from the Brewing Academy, at least according to the Brewing Academy's records. I've bought most of those from the Brewing Academy. I have had 3 UAVs that had problems. 3. Maybe 4. Wait a minute, I got to think about that. I think I've had 4. Yes, I've had 4 UAVs out of 100, nearly 100, and over 100 UAVs I've ordered. I've had 4 that had problems. 2 of those I was able to fix. 3 of those technically I was able to fix on my own. And what the problems were, just in case you should ever run into it, was I basically wasn't getting proper video output, like the colors looked wrong. And it ended up that some of the solder points, some of the solder on this IC chip here apparently was cold. Because I found out that when I pushed down on the chip a little bit while I had the UAV up and running, it would fix itself. So all I had to do was just apply a little bit of flux and just take my iron and just reheat these pins. So on 2 of them, I was able to fix my UAV issues by basically just reflowing the surface mount chip here. The 3rd one was more interesting. What was happening was I thought everything was good to go, but then when I put in a 2600 game, it was in black and white, and no matter what I did, there was no color. But I verified, just like you saw here, that the color burst signal from the TIA, marked as T-call, was connected up and should have been working. The problem ended up being that one of the traces from this via that goes to pin 1 of this IC, that trace apparently was broken. I could actually see it underneath the solder mask where it wasn't making connection. So that was a manufacturing defect. So I ended up having to just, use a small little jumper wire. I actually think I just used one of my leads. I probably just used something like this and then put a little bit of shrink tubing around it and just made that connection back from the color burst back to pin 1 of that IC chip, and that took care of that. The 4th one I actually still have, and I've never been able to actually figure out what's causing the problem. I think one of the IC chips itself is faulty. And at this point in time, I've done so many different things to this poor UAV. It's actually got messed up vias and pads on it now. But I just use it as basically an example board to hold on to. This one was working, except that half of the image was darker than the other half. So there was a problem with the brightness output coming off the UAV, and it was definitely coming from the UAV. It was not the console, because replacing it took care of the issue. And it wasn't due to the solder on this, because I actually applied a little bit of solder and everything, and just, I rehit a lot of parts on this little guy, on this little board, and nothing would get that color output or the brightness output to work properly. It was literally like cut in half. The lower half of the screen was a much darker brightness level than the upper half. And I mean, it was super noticeable. It was obvious there was something wrong. So yeah, I actually keep this in a bag marked as bad UAV. But this UAV is good for camera work. If I need a close-up picture to talk about something specific on a UAV, then I can use this as an example for that. But it's not usable as a functional UAV at this point. It's just got too many issues. Oh, the Dragonfly? Well, the Dragonfly, unfortunately, is unobtainium now. The chips for 10K for the Pokey? No. I use 6.8, 6K8. So basically, you know, around yeah, 6K8. 6.8K is what you want to use for the Pokey. That's what the NTSC consoles have. I have been told that the European 7800s, the PAL 7800s, actually, I want to say somebody told me that they have either possibly a 10 or a 12, or they're actually using like an 18K for both. And as a result, the Pokey audio is always much lower than it should be on PAL consoles. And that would probably explain why Rafal, when he built the Dragonfly, ended up amplifying the Pokey output, was because, of course, he was testing it on PAL consoles. Yes, 6.8K. That is correct. That's what you should use for the Pokey, and for the TIA, you need to use 18. Now, obviously, if you're testing it, and if you're using like the diagnostic utility cartridge that Mike Sarna, also known as Revenge, has created, wonderful test cartridge. If you run that audio test and you still find that perhaps maybe the Pokey or the TIA is not as loud or not as in balance with the other as it should be, well then, you know, you can mess with that a little bit if you need to. But a majority of the people, as long as they can hear the Pokey audio and they can hear the TIA audio and clearly, they're going to be happy with it. And for that, the original Atari values should suffice just fine. Because again, that's what Atari used, at least on the NTSC consoles. Okay, so this is working. At least this UAV is good. That's why I tested it. Again, I have had some bad ones in the past. It's rare, but it can happen. So what I need to do now is I need to solder the UAV down into place. So that's not too difficult at all. Just have to get my iron. Okay. Now I will end up trimming these pins once I've tested it again to make sure it's good. Just because I don't need them sticking up. I mean, they're not going to be a problem if you do have them sticking up. I mean, they're, you know, they're not exactly like in the way or anything. Oh, hey, I forgot one. I forgot my ground. That would not have been good. Okay. One last test. And I could also go ahead and attach, let's see, let's get something here for some audio. All right. I get this flipped around for a second, and I'm going to hold this thing into place. Yeah. This one can be kind of a pain. I usually like to use a wire of some sort. So let me just cut a little bit of wire conductor here. What I was going to do is I was just going to put a quick header pin off the audio output pad that would allow me to quickly connect my test harness. I've got a separate set of RCAs that I use for that. But I'll just go ahead and just do this as I normally would. Again, I don't have to solder any extra components to this wire. This wire eventually would just go straight to the RCA jacks that will be installed. Trim off a little bit. I don't need that much. Okay. Got some wire here, and then go ahead and get this power cord out of my way. Trim off a little bit off the edge here. Go. If you're curious, what I use for the output wire most of the time is I'm using 26 gauge stranded. And then because this one's going to end up being a final connection, give me one moment, I will need to put all right. I need to get a DuPont connector on there. It would be too crazy to put 2 trim pots now. Hold on. Okay, I'm glad I'm on the NTSC side in Mexico. Gotcha. I'll take notes on the resistors. Thanks for that. It would be too crazy to put 2 trim pots. You shouldn't need the 2 trim pots. You really don't in the case of the audio. Again, if you just use a 6.8K on the Pokey side, which is going to be R5, by the way. If you didn't know, R5 is the Pokey, R6 is the TIA. So yeah, just use a 6.8 off of R5, the Pokey, and 18K off the TIA, R6. And again, their orientation is R6 is the one closest to the audio adjustment tower. Okay. All right, so before I crimp this on, one other step I do, this is not critical, but it's just one of those things I do, is I cut a little bit more lead than I actually need, and then I fold it down to double it, make it a little thicker than it needs to be, and then hit it with just a tiny little dollop of solder, not that much, okay, before I crimp it. And this will give a more surface area for the crimped connector to seat onto. There we go, just like that, and crimp. And it holds on there really well this way. Again, that's just something I do to make sure they're going to stay in place. And then I provide one more third final crimp, or a second final crimp. There we go. To form it the way it needs to be. But you got to be careful when you use these crimpers if you don't have them, or if you think about investing in some. You have to be careful that you don't accidentally crimp down the square section right here, because that's the part that clips in and holds into place onto your housing right here. There. So there's my output pin. So I'll just end up, when I put the rest of the wiring harness into place, I'll just have a female connection on the other end of the wires, because I tend to use I always use these DuPont connectors because, you know, I want to make it serviceable, right? I want to make it easy to service in the future if need be. So sure, I could just solder all of my wires directly off of this. You know, some people would do that. I'm sure many people would do that. But I always tend to put these DuPont connectors in place so that I can more easily disconnect everything and remove the whole board from the console without it being tethered to the outputs. And this will allow me to test the audio now as well. So once again, get my ground plugged in here, get my chroma, and I'm just checking the S-video because chances are the composite's going to be fine. I've never had one work and not the other. And then to check the audio, I'm going to get just a normal RCA here that I've got. And I'm going to attach, although the colors are backwards, I don't care. There's my center pin for the audio, and then for the ground, I'm just going to use the other ground on the other side of the UAV, right there. And I'll need to attach this. Where is my, here it is. I have an audio cable I have connected up to a monitor here that I can use. Get that plugged in like that. And now I should be able to pop this cartridge in and I should have a nice clear picture. Yep, nice clear picture. And do we have audio? We do have audio. Let me turn this up so we can hear it a little bit. Do an audio test. Cool. Everything's working. Now you may have noticed that the Pokey output was much lower than the TIA, and that is because I do not have a Pokey chip in this cartridge. I actually have one of Fred Quimby's new Hokey chips in here. And unfortunately, the Hokey, while it works well enough for what I'm using it for here, it does have lower output than a normal Pokey would. So, yeah, there's not much I can do about that. That's just how the Hokey chip has been designed. But it works for what I need it to for testing, and I know that a normal Pokey will sound good. So yeah, UAV's in place. New voltage regulator in place. New capacitors in place. I don't need to worry about those front panel switches on this one because they seem to be working okay. I might ask the client later if they want me to go ahead and replace them just as a preventive measure. But they seem to be working just fine, so, you know, I'm not going to do work or charge them for something that they didn't ask for. They did ask me to replace the capacitors, so that's why I went ahead and did that. Yeah, and of course the UAV. They didn't ask about the voltage regulator, but again, I just do it as part of the service. It's just part of my included cost. I don't even worry about it. Again, it's a $1 part. It takes me, you know, a couple of minutes to change it out. It's not that big a deal. So, and it should be done anyway. I mean, you know, we're adding additional hardware. We are adding the UAV. It doesn't add much current draw, but it will, I want to say it eats up about an extra 200 milliamps of juice to operate the UAV. So it is something to consider. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So what I'm going to do from here on, which I will not be streaming, of course, is I'll take this thing out in the garage. I'm going to hit it with my flux cleaner on both sides of the board just to try to get some of that residual residue off of this that's on here that's just kind of nasty. And then I will let the client know the current status and results of where we're at and see if there's anything else they want, you know, see if they want me to go ahead and change out these front panel switches. They might want a different colored LED for power output. That's a common replacement. I have a lot of people that are like, hey, you know, can you put a blue one, or can you put a green one, or whatever. I even have pink. Yes, I have pink LEDs, and that's actually a fairly popular color that I get requested to add. the consoles. So go figure. UV is another one that's pretty popular, the purple ones. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream, I think, here at this point. Yes, it's about 12:50. So let's see. I still test with Ball Blazer and Tower Toppler. Hey, I checked my good console. It doesn't have the extra green capacitor. Are you talking about the one that I was showing you here in the extra timing circuit, or on the bottom? I don't know if I have one with the capacitor on the bottom or not. Let's see. Okay, this is one of my donor boards here. Let me get this one out of the way. This is actually an early made board. I can tell because, first of all, although it says Rev B on it, it's a lighter color PCB, and quite a few of the chips, in fact, I believe all the chips with the exception of these here, were in sockets originally. These I added sockets to because I tried to troubleshoot this board. It had some other issues and I was not successful, so I just relegated it to being a parts donor at that point. But what you will notice here is that it does not have the extra IC for the extra timing circuit. And in fact, they're bypassing the extra timing circuit with this 0 ohm resistor that they have just standing up here. So just something else to see. At C6, okay, yeah, at C64. Again, it's not always present. A lot of these systems, I'm trying to think of when they started adding these in 87, I believe, on the 87 made units. That's when we started to see these show up. Let's see if I can get some date stamps off of this thing. I don't think I'm going to be able to easily because, and this has got Okidata chips in it. This looks like possibly the 21st, no, that's not going to be right. Is there a date stamp on here? 3rd week of 88. Yeah. The only chip I've got with a reliable date stamp on it, because this one here's been replaced out. This shows the 17th week of 82. This is not the original Riot. This is probably out of a 2600, probably a 4-switcher given that date. But the BIOS chip on this does show 3rd week of 88. So this is a later made board or a later made system, but by this point in time in 88, they were already no longer requiring the extra timing circuit. So not all 7800s will have this. The original model 84 made units or 85 or 86 made units do not typically have this. That extra timing circuit seems to predominantly be present on a lot of the consoles made in 87. So I have to assume that's when the majority of them were also made. This one also does not have the extra deglitch capacitor on it either that normally would have been somewhere down here. I don't think I have any with the deglitch cap on it. Again, I don't see it too terribly often, but it can sometimes show up. This is another parts board. This one's really been stripped. This one's got traces that were broken off of it and ripped off of it. It would have been repairable, but it actually arrived to me pretty much already like this, and I specifically bought it as a donor board. But it's also been handy for reference because, as I'm sure you may notice, a lot of the components when they're installed, their silkscreen identifiers are covered up. You can't see what it is. So if you're looking at a schematic, or if you're looking at some sort of a flowchart troubleshooting guide and it's talking about specific components and it labels them, you don't absolutely know where they are. So it's handy to have a board that's pretty naked like this one is to make that a little easier to see. Plus, it makes it a little easier for me to see where some of the traces were underneath some of these main IC chips, which is nice. I actually have a high quality picture of a completely stripped 7800 board that's in great shape, both front and back, that I also use as reference, but it's also nice to actually have a physical board in hand that I can actually take my meter to and probe and check things out. But this one did have the extra timing circuit on it. You can see here that capacitor is present. Let's see if there's a date stamp on this. Looks like the 1st week of 87, according to the 7402 down here. 1st week of 1987. Yeah, so right there you go. This extra timing circuit was added brand new here. So maybe even later 86 they started putting these into place. It looks like my 7413, the 4013 buffer at the top is actually the 31st week of 83. So that's old, but I didn't replace that. That came on here. So I guess that's Atari reusing what they had on hand. But it too does not have the extra capacitor on the bottom for deglitch. So I don't see them too often, but they do come in sometimes, and when I see it, I leave it. And if I test the 7800 and it has issues with Ball Blazer, then I might play around with adding it in, especially if I see a Rockwell. In fact, given the fact that this 7800 has a Rockwell, I should probably pop in Ball Blazer real quick just to see if it has any graphical issues. I've got two separate versions of Ball Blazer. Let me see here. So they're both missing their pokies because those were repurposed for other things, of course, but the game will still work. It just won't have any audio. But this is both Ball Blazer. I believe this is an earlier revision, and this is a newer revision. And the first immediate differences are some extra resistors were added that are missing on this one, in addition to these extra capacitors. And part of me wonders if Atari started adding some of this deglitch capacitor stuff directly to the game cartridges on later revisions so that they didn't have to worry about it from a hardware level. But that's just a guess. And I wish I could tell you that the date stamps on these actually tell me which is which. They don't, because they both show the 7th week of 1988 on both of these. Everything else, all of the rest of the silk screening on these chips is identical. So the actual code has not changed between these two revisions, but the components they added to the boards are. And they also have the same part numbers on the board, so that doesn't tell me much either. Let's see, well, maybe is that a date stamp? 1688? No, that says 1688 also. So, there's no difference in these boards other than the extra components that were installed on one and not the other. And I want to say that this one here has a tendency to crash more on some troublesome 7800s versus this one. So, yeah. But anyway, since I'm thinking about it, we'll go ahead and in fact, yeah, I'll just do that. I'll just go ahead and I don't need to see anything too in depth. I will use the composite output this time on my little PVM next to me, and I'll just connect it up to that. And we'll see if this has any glitching issues or not. Well, composite works. Interesting. I got a screen of stripes. Let me try wiggling this out a little bit in case I'm not making good contact. I did not clean the contacts on this PCB, so maybe it's dirty. Nope. I'm just getting stripes. So yeah, this might be affected. Let me try the one that has the additional components on it. See what that gives us. That one works. I've got the Lucasfilm logo, but this one here just gives me a black screen with 3 stripes along the side. Ooh, but it is a little glitchy. I do have some flickering in the blue background. So yeah, it is a little bit glitchy. So this one might just benefit. I'll have to play with that later. I do have one of those. I can't remember the exact value, but I actually took it off of another board. I've got one of the capacitors, and I think I've actually just used even just 100 nanofarad caps, which I've got quite a few of on hand, is close enough. It doesn't have to be exact, but it's got to be able to provide a little bit of extra capacitance. So yeah, this version of Ball Blazer is working. The other one does not. So that's a reason why I have both of these versions on hand for testing. Because you just never know. Pole position might give me similar issues. I do have 2 different versions of pole position. I have one of the 84 made cartridges, and I have a later 87 made one, and they also have similar differences in the way they behave on different 7800s. So interesting. I'm glad we had this little discussion to talk about that, because now I have identified that this one does have some potential issues. So yeah, I'll try adding that in, see if it comes up. If it doesn't boot up at all with that extra capacitor, then I'm just going to leave it alone because there's really not much else I can do other than completely replacing out this Rockwell 6502 with you know, like a Signetics or an NCR branded one, and I just don't have those on hand. So not a huge deal. Let's see what else we have here. Cap 64 not Commodore. Also, I've seen a problem with pressing player 1's fire button on any game. It changes the color and makes a weird noise on the TIA. A slight shift in the chroma, same in the 2600 and 7800 games. Then I release the fire button and it goes back to normal. I wonder what's the funny story of why the chips are called Hokey and Pokey. I believe the Pokey was named what it was. I mean, I don't know the full breakdown of what it stands for, but I mean, what the Pokey handles in addition to audio, it also handles the it also handles I/O, and the key side of that name would be for keyboard matrix, because the Pokey is used and was originally used in the 400 and the 800 before they started using it in the 5200 and later 8 bits. So originally, you know, it handled a lot of I/O and keyboard stuff, and it still does. It just also happens to generate noise with its 4 channels and its capabilities there. So I am assuming that Pokey has its name related to what it does functionality-wise. As for the Hokey, I'm assuming Fred just called it that because he didn't want to call it a Pokey. It's not a Pokey. It's like a fake Pokey. It's a Pokey replica. So Hokey, I guess, is as good a name as any. Or maybe he called it that because of the Hokey Pokey. I'm just guessing. I'm just grabbing at straws here, really. But those are my guesses. All right. Well, anyway. What is it now? It is just right at 1 o'clock my time here central. The Ivory Tower is located in the central time zone of the continental United States, North America. So I'm going to end the stream here and catch you guys another time. Maybe I'll update in the comments later if adding in the additional D-glitch cap to the CPU took care of the older revision ball blazer problem or not. But again, it's not a huge deal. In fact, let's... You know what, I know I keep saying I'm going to end this, but I just want to make absolutely sure I am doing my due diligence to test this. Let me go ahead and clean these contacts. Although they're pretty shiny, I got to admit. I mean, I only use these to pop in here to test for a little bit just to see things are working. That's not really dirty. And it's actually even squeaking a little bit as I do this. Nope, same results. Again, I get a black screen with actually 4 thin white vertical lines on the far left-hand side. It always gives me the exact same screen, regardless. Whereas the other one works, but it's got some slight glitchiness with some flickering in the background. But otherwise it looks fine. I've actually seen ball blazer flicker like that on quite a few 7800s, and as long as it doesn't crash after a while, I don't worry about it too much. But yeah, this one definitely just does not want to work in this 7800, so it might very well benefit by adding in the D-glitch capacitor off the address 15 line of the CPU. And I'll give that a shot later to see if it takes care of it. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. I mainly wanted to do this video so that you could see the UAV mount board that I use and see how I solder it into place, how it works. Again, it's not a required item, but it does allow for the UAV to sit nice and confined in a nice little spot, and it's not going anywhere. I mean, it's all soldered directly to the board essentially, so it's a nice secure mount. And since it is, excuse me, since it is working, I can go ahead and cut the tops of these off. About the only one I can't really cut because I just can't get to it very well is the Maria color in the back corner. Because again, it's just covered. I just can't get to that. So, but I'm not going to worry about that one too much. There we go. And I can also go ahead and clean this up a little bit. All right. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your afternoon and the rest of your Sunday, and have a good week. And hopefully I will catch you guys again soon. I know I haven't had like a real video that I've put out in a long time, and I don't have any good excuse for that other than the fact that I have been busy. If it's not with stuff at work, my normal day job, then it's with client requests. I had to put all my services on hold over the summer, and as a result, I had a wait list of people wanting stuff done, of course. So when I started working on consoles or offering my services again at the beginning of this month, or I'm sorry, last month at the beginning of November, it's been steady for me. So anyway, I do have things I can put videos on at some point. I think the next video that I will do, it won't be a very long one, but it'll be on this lovely little guy right here. This is my chip tester. I've been using this quite a bit lately on some 2600 consoles especially, so that's very nice. And I might even do a video on this. This is my BackBit Pro flash cartridge, multi-system flash cartridge. This is pretty cool too. The cool thing about this cartridge is that it's a multi-system flash cartridge because you purchase adapters on the end that you need to allow it to work in various consoles. And when I mean various consoles, I mean a lot of consoles. I mean, I won't go into all of them here, but I mean, this is actually my Intellivision adapter again, as I just stated. They also have one for the 2600. They have one for the 5200 that's coming out soon. I've already pre-ordered that. You can get it for the VIC-20, the TI-99, the Bally Astrocade, Commodore systems. The list is very extensive. So the cool thing about it is, you know, you're basically paying that one purchase price for the main brains of that cartridge, and it's not the cheapest. It's about $120 for the main cartridge, but then it's like another $20 for each of the adapters. So when you really break it down, it's kind of an expensive initial cost, but then you save yourself a ton with all of the different systems that it can be used on with just purchasing the separate smaller adapters that plug onto it thereafter. So it's really nice. And it's always being updated, constantly being updated, which is nice too, to allow compatibility, improved compatibility with different games, things like that. Okay, I'm going to leave here for now. Oh, hey, Blaine. Something gunky in my bad 7800. The corrosion killed my 7800. Maybe because I'm late to the chat, someone's already mentioned, but your sound is buzzing. Okay, so I think the reason why it's buzzing is because of the way I am using this microphone setup. I usually put a noise filter in place to eliminate that, and therefore you don't really hear it as much because the noise filter only kicks in whenever I start talking. But for some reason it's not working very well today on my stream. It's basically always showing up the audio regardless. I'm not sure why. So I do apologize for that. My laptop is not the best for doing this. I have a much better setup in the game room for the few times that I've done stuff there. But yeah, let me go ahead, like right now, I'm going to go ahead and I just added the noise filter. It helps, but my heater just kicked on and it's still picking that up. So yeah, it's not perfect. But hopefully it's a little bit better. If I probably should have put the noise reducer in, but sometimes it doesn't kick in quick enough and some of my syllables might get cut off when I talk. So I'm still learning OSB. I don't know all of its tricks and features yet. I have to look up things on the video, play around with it. Okay, so yeah, it's buzzing whenever I talk. Well, for starters, the condenser microphone that I use, this lavalier mic, actually requires power in order to work. So because of that, in order to allow it to work with this laptop, I actually have to increase the gain considerably for it to function, like a bunch. So that's going to increase the floor noise or system noise coming off this laptop by itself. And the reason why you only hear it when I talk now is because the noise suppression filter I just added basically kills all audio to the microphone until I start talking. But you hear it when I start talking because then, you know, it kicks in and you can still hear it. So yeah, I apologize. One of these days, maybe I'll get like a nice headset or something that's better designed for streaming.
But the microphone I use is the microphone I use for all of my videos, and normally it is connected directly to my camcorder for this. Unfortunately, while I could do that here and it would sound very nice, it would also completely eat up batteries because it's a wireless microphone setup that uses AAAs. It only lasts for maybe a couple hours on a set of batteries, so I would be going through a lot of batteries. So I tend to just plug the mic directly into my laptop because it's sitting here right next to me. So I apologize. Again, I'm not a professional streamer. I do what I can. But hopefully, aside from the buzzing, the rest of the audio is enough for me to be understood. So, all right. Again, I keep saying it, but I am going to go ahead and end the stream at this point. So again, have a good rest of your Sunday, good rest of your afternoon, and I will catch you guys another time. All right.